I think I'd like now to invite up to the dais our first panel for the discussion on investment trends in agribusiness in Brazil. Our moderator today is Mr. Thomas DeCoene, a senior advisor at Shelter Rock Capital. Mr. DeCoene has a long career in international finance with a focus in Latin America and Asia. He was previously CEO of Global Capital Access until 2006 and has served in leadership positions with Itaú, USA Securities, GE Capital, and Citibank, among other notable financial institutions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. And I must say it's an honor for this panel to follow this excellent presentation from Minister Guardia. I feel very optimistic. I'd like to invite my panelists here to the podium, and let me thank everybody here. My name is Thomas DeCoene. I'm with Shelter Rock, which is a capital advisor for real estate and real assets. I'm also proud of being linked to the Brazilian Chamber, of being a director of the Chamber for many, many years. I'd like to thank the Chamber for putting this together, and also thanks the sponsors for putting all of this this great event together. So today we would like to focus on a bright spot of the Brazilian economy, which is agriculture and agribusiness. Many of you have noticed that this has been consistently good news coming from that sector. The sector now has a significant amount of the Brazilian GDP and has shown an average growth of about 6.8% in volume over the last decade, putting Brazil as a top producer in many agricultural commodities, as you know, and this year surpassing the USA in soybean for the first time. More good news is that there is an increase in funds available for the sector from the private sector, and also the fact that Brazilian farmers are becoming more and more productive. More about that later. This is the third year that we organize this panel, and today, with the help of this prestigious group of panelists, we will address several themes important to the agriculture and agribusiness in Brazil. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our panelists. You can find their bios in this folder, so I will start in alphabetical order. Each one of the panelists will introduce themselves, but let me just say a few words before they do that. So to the far left, we have Caio de Andrade. Is that correct? Yes. Caio is a farmer and also an internet entrepreneur. Since 2013, he has restructured and developed over 44 properties in Brazil, which he acquired from one of the large trading companies. It's always good to have a farmer on the panel. Caio is also working on introducing a rather disruptive app for the Brazilian farmer. He will tell us more about it. Next to Caio is Antonio. Okay, so you've all messed up with my notes here. And Antonio is a partner with Patria Blackstone and is responsible for the recently launched Farmland Management Fund. We then have Paula. Paula is the IR for, Paula Kovarsky is the IR for Cosan Limited, plus she is responsible for the office of Cosan in New York. And next to me here, we have Caio, we have Enrique. Sorry, I had my notes prepared, but musical chairs here. We have Enrique, who's the CEO of TII Westchester, or Radar, which is a significant investor in Brazil, also responsible for the Brazilian part of GAF, which is Global Agricultural Fund, which is, of which the main investor is TIA Westchester. So I will start with questions, and after questions we will probably have 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So what I'd ask all of you to spend a few minutes describing yourselves and your companies. Don't make it too long, and then we'll go into questions. So we'll start, ladies first, with Paula, and then we'll go to Caio, Enrique, and Antonio. So Paolo, tell us a little bit more about yourself and Cosan.
Hi. Thank you for the invitation, Thomas. My name is Paula Kovarsky. I've been in the oil industry for a while with Shell and then in the financial markets with Itaú BBA to join Cosan 3 years ago. And I'd like to spend this few moments here talking a little bit about that company that back in 2007 was a pure sugar and ethanol player with about 500 million reais worth of EBITDA. And today became probably one of the largest conglomerates in Brazil with 5 key lines of business. One is the sugar and ethanol production under our JV with Shell named Raízen. We also have fused distribution under the same JV. We have a lubricants distribution business named Movie. We have gas distribution in the state of São Paulo through Comgás, and we now own the largest railway-based logistics company in Brazil named Rumo, and I think that's probably the company that has a lot to do with this panel here, talking about developing sustainable infrastructure for the agribusiness in this such a big country.
Thank you very much, Paula. Spoken as a true IR, and you can see her afterwards if you would like to buy some shares. I strongly recommend. Next is Caio.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation at the chamber, and you, Thomas. Very proud to be here in this panel. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but my background, I'm a digital entrepreneur in Brazil. I built and sold 3 different companies in the last 18 years. Webforce has been one of the, very quiet but very active players in this field there. And 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to buy some land, and I have never been in a farm in my life. So I went there and I bought 52,000 hectares of farms, and start to learn how the farmers are, how entrepreneurial they are, how they change everything. They move from, Rio Grande do Sul, they go up to Tocantins, they go up to Mato Grosso. I was fascinated by their stories. And I start to realize how, the asymmetry of information that exists from the farmers and the capital markets and the data science. They don't have that. And if they had that, they could be much better and take much better decisions in their lives. So I decided to come with this idea of Paralogs. And Paralogs is the name of my new website that I'm launching in like a month from now, hopefully. And what Paralog does is to enable farmers to work in a network of information where they supply data to the network, and they get back anonymously, information to take decisions. There is a very famous company here in the US now doing the same kind of things. I didn't know that, but it's called the Farmer Business Network. If you want to see the website, it's fascinating because this is going to change the whole thing that we know about how farmers take decisions. And I guess that's why I'm here in this panel, right, Thomas?
I guess so. So, thank you very much. Enrique, your turn.
Hello. It's an honor being invited to this panel. It's an honor being in such a prestigious house. And it's a pleasure talking about agriculture and talking about Brazil. So my name is Enrique. I am an agronomist as a background. I've been working with agribusiness for 25 years. I am the CEO of Westchester, which is named in Brazil Radar. I've been working the trading company Louis Dreyfus previous to that for 19 years, 2 years with a beef export company, Minerva. And Westchester, where I am for a year already, manages an extensive farmland portfolio around the world, the Midwest and the Delta of the Mississippi River here with row crops, in California with perennial crops, New Zealand and Chile also with perennial crops, Australia and Europe with row crops, and in Brazil, where I'm based since last year. So.
Very good. Thank you very much. Antonio, last but not least.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Antonio Wever. I'm a partner of Patria. Patria is one of the largest investment management companies in Latin America. We have today a little bit more than $10 billion of assets under management across our private equity, infrastructure, and real estate funds. And we should reach $15 billion at the end of the year with the next capital raising efforts we are undertaking. Basically, with respect to farmland, what we have been doing over the past 2 years is the following. We saw that we were already very active across different points in the value chain, namely the fertilizer through an investment in our private equity fund, and in waterways in our infrastructure fund. So we thought there would be a lot of synergies between these activities in terms of information flow and the activity of buying and selling farmland in Brazil. And that combined with the fact that we believe that Brazil has consolidated its position as what we call the Saudi Arabia of grains, prompted us to launch this effort.
Excellent. I like the Saudi Arabia of grains. Okay, so we have two funds. We have Cosan and we have Caio, which is kind of difficult to describe, but you will know it by the end. So let me start with Enrique. Enrique, tell us a little bit more about Radar and GAF and what kind of tickets you like to write and what you've been doing in Brazil.
First, Brazil is a very important pillar in this diversified portfolio of farmland. Basically, in our country, we have roughly 1/3 of the farms that we manage cropped with sugarcane for the origins. About the other third with soybeans, corn, and cotton, grains in general. And the last third is separated as legal reserves and permanent protection areas, so as foreseen in the Brazilian Forest Code. This is our footprint in Brazil, 8 states. Brazil represents about 30% of the total assets that we manage worldwide. And we typically invest in areas already converted into agriculture for several years. Mm-hmm. And we look for areas already consolidated where we can find good tenants, good operators to manage or to farm, to operate the farms. Typically in Brazil we are not really operating. Most of that farmland is leased out to very professional tenants.
And what kind of size are you looking at typically?
Yeah, we would not look at properties worth less than $10 million because of the strict due diligence that we do and we run before acquisition.
Okay,
we
good.
Should talk.
So, Antonio, I want you to follow up with that and kind of give me a description of your fund, Farmland Management Fund, and also how you differ a little bit from what Enrique just said.
Yeah, we have a focus on small to medium-sized properties that range from 1,000 to 5,000 hectares. We try to do business on the agricultural frontier because we see more opportunities there. One of the differences between what we do and what Enrique does is the fact that not only do we look at already producing farms as he does, but we are also contemplating the transformation play the acquisition of pasture land to be transformed into producing farms. So that's basically one of the differences, in addition to the fact that I think we buy smaller properties. The two strategies are different in the sense that in the transformation play, you try to capture the value you add to the property through the transformation process. In the other, you basically focus on good quality land, farms, that for whatever reason are being sold mainly for liquidity reasons, liquidity situations, and we step in as the liquidity providers.
Excellent. So you buy degraded pasture land, convert it to row crops, so you take a little bit longer, but you buy it cheaper, so you have a higher potential for returns compared to Henrique.
That's correct. On a risk-adjusted basis, we think from a risk-return standpoint, we think the two plays are similar, but one, when you acquire an already producing farm, you are probably paying a higher price, and you have a shorter duration and lower risk. When you acquire degraded pasture land, it will take longer, because just to convert the land, it will take 2-3 years. You have the risk of the transformation process, but also you are paying lower prices.
Excellent. Okay. Let me switch now to Paula. Paula, tell us a little bit about Cozan's involvement in agribusiness, and do you see that evolving over the years?
Okay, let me split the conversation into, right? Let me start with the sugar and ethanol business, which is where the company started off kind of 70, 80 years ago. And then we can talk a little bit about logistics, which is more of a newer business for the group. So as I was saying in my previous comment, this was a company of pure sugar and ethanol, 500 million EBITDA back in 2007. A lot happened ever since through diversification, but especially after the formation of Raízen, which is our 50-50 JV with Shell in 2011. I think our agribusiness has been through a very impressive efficiency journey. The view back then was Brazil is the least cost producer of sugar, but Raízen wants to be the least cost producer in Brazil. We had a portfolio of 24 mills, which were run kind of independently. And we decided to use a very process-oriented approach to the agribusiness, which I think was something very new at that point. We started to, for example, replicate the centralized logistic approach that we had to the fuels distribution into the agri side. We started to use a lot of technology into the sugar and ethanol production. And the end of that story is a quite significant reduction in cost, but most importantly, a very impressive optimization of all of the agribusiness and industrial processes involved in the production of sugar and ethanol in Brazil. As you may know, Raízen is the biggest sugar producer with over 11-12% market share in Brazil. Brazil accounts for roughly 50% of the global trade of sugar. But however, sugar is a culture that hasn't had as many investments compared, for example, to soybean or corn, which are more of developed countries' cultures. So this has been a very important journey for us in reducing costs and turning our sugar and ethanol business sustainable, no matter what the sugar or ethanol pricing cycle, which has been our main goal, and I think we are pretty well in that direction. Talking a little bit about logistics, which started off as an idea in 2008, which was to create a sustainable and efficient logistic solution for sugar exports. So Cosan invested 1.5 billion reais in a deal with the former owner of the railways in Brazil to debottleneck capacity and essentially make sure that we had a solution for our sugar exports. A lot happened ever since. to a point where Cosan ended up merging its old and initial logistic company named Rumo at the time with the entire network of ALL. So the company that you see today named Rumo is essentially the result of that merger. We took over the logistics operations of Rumo in 2015. And I don't want to spend much time here talking about the past, but what's really amazing to see is how much we did in 3 years, a little bit more than 3 years. We've taken, especially the northern operations, which is essentially the connection between the Midwest region of Brazil, where the vast majority of the grains are produced, to the main ports, most importantly Santos. So this is a 1,600 kilometers railway corridor. And in about 3 years, we managed to bring the operations of that corridor to very similar levels compared to the most well-known railway companies in the US and in Canada. And I think the availability of a sustainable, reliable, and predictable logistic solution for grains production in Midwest is in a way responsible, together with many other things, but in a way responsible for the willingness of the farmers in that region to continue to invest and to invest more in productivity, and because they're now sure that they have, you know, a solution that it's getting better by the day and becoming, it's already the most efficient way to transport grains from Midwest all the way down to Santos, and it's improving by the day. So those are the two main involvements of Cosan with the agribusiness today.
Thank you very much. Excellent. We'll get back to that. Caio, you in your opening remarks, you said that you invested in farmland, knew nothing about it. My question is, tell us a little bit more about your experience of acquiring these 44 properties, and would you do it again?
Oh, of course, I would. It's very tricky to get a title that it's just a piece of paper and go after, you know, this piece of land. So if you see my map, I have been all over Brazil. I've been talking to people all over Brazil. And my experience was I had to understand how the government wants you to have, you know, to put the title in a correct position. To do that, it's a lot of work, and the good news is that once you do that, the price of the property changes completely. That's the first step, is before what Patria does, because I got land that the company that sold to me, they did not know where it was. I had to go after it. Right? So, and I don't know if you know, but farms, they move. They are here one day, here another day. It's amazing.
And there's also the second floor.
Oh, the second floor, third floor, sometimes. Elevators, right? But learning how to do that, my portfolio like completely changed the value. I have now like 30,000 hectares that have georeferencing in the title, so which is a lot different from what I bought. And I can, it's very hard because I'm in this field where we build digital companies, and digital companies you make, you do a little investment and then you see how it goes, and then you do a little bit more investment, you see it. I'm in the business of losing as less money as fast as possible. That's what I do. And with different companies. When I see what's going on with land in Brazil, and probably the government will change the rules and accept foreigners as investors, probably, there is no better investment. I can't see, when you talk about real assets, I can't see anything better than that.
Excellent, very good. Let me go back to Enrique. Enrique, you've invested, as you said, a significant amount of capital in Brazil, divided in the row crops and sugarcane and also the preserved areas. How do you see the future? How does that break down, let's say, in 5 years' time? You're going to invest more in row crops, more in sugarcane, and how do you see the growth?
I see us investing more in those sectors, in those areas, but also we want to diversify to perennial crops, maybe coffee, maybe timber, fruits in Brazil, but also expand a bit to other countries in South America. But mainly we'll keep following the growth of grains, sugarcane, which is our main investments.
Excellent. Antonio, why don't you expand a little bit on your analogy between the oil-producing countries and Brazil? How do you see Brazil as being a natural selection for being one of the world's agriculture powerhouses?
Yeah, the Chinese demand for protein has been growing for more than 12% per annum over the past 10 years. And if you look at the Brazilian increase in soybean production, it has been around growth. It has been around 10%. In other words, Brazil is the geographical location that is satisfying Asian demand for protein and grains. And if you look at the areas of the world that can provide additional farmland to be converted and to continue to produce grains, you are left with Latin America, namely Brazil, Africa, and Eastern Europe. And when you put it all together, Brazil is already a global commodities leader. It has the capacity to at least double its planted area. And it has infrastructure, and despite some of the difficulties that we were talking about, it has institutional stability. The other locations are way behind us in terms of these elements. So Brazil has all the conditions to consolidate its position as the, if you will, the incremental provider of protein to the world, and that should have a very positive impact on our development. And going back to the logistical point, there has been several investments in logistics that are fundamentally altering the way grains are exported in Brazil. And we did some analysis that show that if you are a central Brazilian farmer, because of the developments of the railroads and the Northern Arch that have reduced the lead time to China, sometimes from 70 days to 35 days, you are going to have an increase in your bottom line around 50 to 100%.
Paula, to tell us a little bit about the advantages of Brazil as a center of excellence for agriculture, I think probably linked a lot to the logistics side.
Yeah, but again, starting with our agribusiness per se, part of the business, Brazil is probably the only, if not maybe with another couple of examples, where institutions are not as strong as they are in Brazil, and where politics and government intervention are a lot higher. So I would argue we're probably one in a few of the places where you can actually grow sugarcane production. But that being said, we really don't see any capacity addition coming on stream in the short term. The reason being that the policy conditions haven't been there for quite a long time. Sector-wise, we still have a pretty high indebtedness. I'd say maybe 30-40% of our sugar producers in Brazil are, with close to unbearable debt levels. And this is something that will have to be worked out so that sugarcane production can grow at some time in the future. There's been a big boom of investments in the early 2000s. With the view that ethanol would probably be the next generation fuel, and that blends will be implemented across the world. and that didn't happen in the expected velocity, and at the same time we had a gasoline pricing policy that was an issue for producers. So I think the situation today, at least from a pricing transparency standpoint, is a lot better for the ethanol side. Sugar and sugar is a commodity and will suffer the roller coaster pricing environment of commodities, and this is why we've been so diligent and so focused in improving efficiency and reducing costs in our businesses. Talking about logistics then, and I can't agree more with Antonio here on how important logistics have been, especially to the Midwest region of Brazil. It's a region where production grows like 6-7% per annum regardless, so it's really decoupled from whatever have happened to the country over the last many years. And our goal there is essentially to continue to provide this efficient solution. When you think about the cost to transport a ton of soybean or corn from the Midwest all the way down to Santos, and how much the railway brings, efficiency and cost saving, is just amazing. Rumo has put roughly 6 billion reais of investments to work essentially in changing the entire rolling material, and now working very hard in retrofitting the railway so that the solution becomes more and more of an option for producers in the Midwest region. And I think what's important to say is this is a virtual cycle for a company like Rumo, and therefore for a country like Brazil, because even the agriculture in itself, but the logistics in particular, are capital-intensive businesses. So you invest, demand is there, and the more you capture additional demand, you're able to dilute your fixed costs, which means you become more efficient and better positioned to capture the next ton to be transported. And this is why we are so confident in that solution, and we've been committed to the investments. As I said, 6 billion already. There's another 4.9 billion to go until 2020, because we really believe this to be the right way to transport grains from Midwest to Santos, and then from Santos to wherever the grains go. And also there are other interesting projects that are very important for that, starting with the renewal of the Paulista concessions, which is one of our concessions, so that we can continue to invest. We have a project of expanding our network all the way up to Sorriso, which is another 650 kilometers up, and this will increase further the efficiency because we will avoid part of the gathering through trucks. So again, we're very confident on that idea. Brazil is a continental country, and it's unbelievable that 70% of our logistics is still trucks-based, in some cases with a lot of informality. It's an industry that has enjoyed a great boom over the last 10 years or so on the credit boom that we saw in Brazil. But there's been not much investment in the maintenance of those trucks, so we'll sooner rather than later start to face the scrapping of that fleet, and therefore we are so, as I said, so confident that the railway is the right solution there.
Excellent, very good. We'll talk a little bit more about specific projects. Going back to Caio. Caio, you started your career in the digital world, bringing the internet to Brazil, and also digitizing a lot of the services such as internet and real estate, creating easy access for both buyers and brokers. But farmers are not brokers, and they tend to be conservative lots. So how do you see developing this app for farmers, and how can you measure success in that project?
Money. Yes. You would be surprised how farmers, they depend upon the information, the internet, and they are always connected. They are not disconnected. They are. There is a lots of innovation going on. Most of the innovation is from porteira para dentro, to inside the farms. What Paralogs does, it's very interesting because when I acquired the portfolio that I have, I had a very difficult time figuring out how much costs a farm, right? What's the price of a farm? I knew the price that I paid, but I didn't know how, the price that it was for sale. I heard different things, and because it's very local, it depends on the farm. Each property is a property. It's not like in the real estate market where you say in urban real estate you say, oh, here is 10,000 square meters, blah blah. So I did this, I hired these guys out of Campinas, Unicampi, 2 stats, 1 map, digital map guy, 1 developer, and 1 project manager. Because I wanted to find an algorithm that could give me the price of each property in Brazil. That's what I wanted. I want to get a title, I want to import the title into the map, and I want to see how much is it. So I got it. I have it. I made it, and this is going to be launched very soon. So you can go to Sorriso, for example, and see that in Sorriso there are like, I think it's 323 different properties that have their titles officially in the government. Because if it's not official, I can't help, right? But if it's official, I can, bring that thing to my map, and my map is going to run the algorithm, and then I'm going to say, your farm, my estimation is that your farm is worth 12,535,000 reais. And you know what I'm going to do for you? I'm going to give you 5 million reais in credit right away. So that's Paralogs. That's what I'm going to do. This is the first level. There are 3 levels. The first level is finance. The second level is analytics, data science, to help them to take better decisions. And the third level is to buy their production and sell directly in China. They can sell their production in China. So it's big time disintermediation. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. The value of a network of farmers, it's just for you to have an idea, FBN, Farmer Business Network, has raised so far $195 million from Google Ventures, Temasek, all the big funds. And they are, in every single round, putting more money. They put Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D. And the company is a unicorn from Silicon Valley. And if we're successful enough with Paralogs, we can buy them, right? That's the idea.
Okay, excellent. That's an excellent segue to a question for Antonio. Antonio, tell us a little bit how 1 hectare or 1 property in Brazil compares to other parts of the world, such as Argentina, for example, where there's a very well-developed and long-term agricultural business, and also the U.S. grain belt.
Yeah, on average, if you take the price of land at the agricultural frontier in Brazil, I'm talking about Mato Grosso, west of Bahia, Piauí, Tocantins, Maranhão, you probably can buy land there, good quality land, from $3,000 to $6,000 per hectare. Prices in the developed regions of Argentina are above 10,000, and in the U.S. Corn Belt, they are approaching $20,000. There are some reasons for that. Obviously, you have the documentation problem, you have some liquidity problems, but to us, the biggest reason that explains this gap is logistics, is the way grains are transported to the ports, because today it's still very inefficient. And as I said, with the developments of the railroads in the northern arch, which is a set of 4 or 5 ports in northern Brazil that are now receiving grains through waterways and railroads, this gap should be significantly reduced. A comment on the Northern Arch logistics. Over the past 5 years, exports through these ports have grown at a rate of 42% per annum. Obviously, they started off from a much lower base, but still, they already represent 17% of the Brazilian exports in 2018. So the price gap with the improvements in logistics should be significantly reduced in the medium run.
Excellent, excellent. Enrique, GAF, Global Agricultural Fund, is present in many parts of the world, and you're now looking, I understand, at some other Latin American countries, Paraguay, Colombia maybe. Tell us, if you can answer kind of the same question, how do you see the price that are prevalent in Brazil today compared to other places where you guys are active?
I agree with Antonio. Brazil is about 4 to 5 times cheaper than the Midwest Delta of the Mississippi River, about 3 times cheaper than Argentina. And besides of the reasons he mentioned on some risks related to our country or to documentation, you have logistics as one big factor. It's a continental country. If you go to Mato Grosso, in the very middle of the Midwest of Brazil, you have the cheapest price for soybean in the world, the cheapest price for corn mainly in the world. And not only we need to develop infrastructure to take these food and fibers out of the Midwest into the export market, but another way of improving the economics of this production is developing demand locally. You know, you have processing facilities right there. If we have, poultry, pork production, beef production, vegetables processing, adding more value to crops, so it's another boost that you can have on land prices. In our, valuation models that goes with Caio, application. We look at some years from now and we plug the bottlenecking of logistics. And if it's a consolidated region, let's say that we go back to the southeast in São Paulo state, then we do not add anything to happen in the coming years. But if you go to Mato Grosso and if this railroad achieves Sorriso, it's going to be a trigger in land prices and agricultural value in general. So, but another point in not only having this potential upside in Brazil for farmland, for agriculture, we do that having much stricter rules on the environmental and social legislation. And it was said that Antonio also mentioned that Brazil has a unique potential for growing area. And again, I agree. But we can also, because the world demands, food, fiber, and energy from ag sector, from Brazil, but also demands the sustainable production and the conservation of our, environmental assets. And the country can do both at the same time. Excellent. It has about 65 million hectares of pasture, and you have a big potential. Just a last comment on that, Thomas. It's you can grow and gain productivities if there are some estimates using general FAO data saying that between 2025 and 2030, the world would need equivalent to 250 million hectares to meet the growing demand for food, fiber, and energy. And then there's not such an amount of land available, but if you bet on productivity, you could get 200 million hectares out of this 250. So, but it's still remaining 50 million hectares to put into production. So, in our view, it would come mostly from pasture and mostly from Brazil.
And if I could add, in terms of this big effort on productivity and efficiency and what has been done in Raisin, we started off, as I said, as a cost-cutting journey back in early 2007, 8, and then in 2011 with the formation of Raisin. But it's interesting that this initiative, which was in the beginning to start with, training our people for the mechanization of the planting and harvesting processes of the sugar cane, then centralizing logistics. But for example, we were pioneering in having a GPS in every NH machine we have operating in the fields today, which opened the floor for us to, centralize and optimize all of our activities. So we cut, for example, the number of trucks required for the agribusiness operations in a quite significant way. We reduced the cutting, loading, and transportation costs from over 37 reais per ton down to 25 today. We are investing in the second generation ethanol, whose idea is essentially to extract more energy and more food, or whatever TRS of sugarcane from the same hectare. And out of this initial movement, this became very much of a technology issue in the beginning, because sending data from the field to the central logistics became an issue. So we started to look at algorithms and ways to optimize the data transmission. Then we started to cover all of our plantations, for example, with drones after we finished the planting season, to make sure we would identify any possible losses and be able to fix them. And at the same time, our people working on the biotechnology part were trying to understand what would be the best seed to replant whenever there was a loss, to a point where Raisin today has an incubator of startups located in Piracicaba. The name is Pulse. And this has become really an avenue of opportunities for us to be able to, in the coming years, optimize not only between sugar and ethanol, but also between sugar, ethanol, and energy, because we could generate a lot of energy in our mills as well. So going along with your point that, the field is the one that will have to provide food and energy to the world going forward, and this is where we are investing.
Excellent. Let me go back to Caio, and you mentioned FBN in the US. I understand there's also another similar app called Web Farm in Africa. Do you see a consolidation? I think you kind of mentioned that. Do you see consolidation in these disruptive digital platforms, or is this a regional or an in-country play? In other words, if I'm a farmer in Sorriso, as we're now using Sorriso, why would I want to know what somebody does in Ghana or in the Midwest?
No, that's not. When you see consolidation, you're talking about consolidation in the information?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it doesn't matter to a farmer in Sorriso what's going on in Ghana, maybe curiosity. But what matters is if you're buying from Monsanto, you're buying from Monsanto, and you're buying from Monsanto, you have 3 different prices. And what Paralogs does is to be sure that the 3 of you have the same price. This is one of the things, right? If you are yielding 55 sacks, you are 62. Why? Is the difference, right? So this kind of things, they're very local. You have to, just like FBN is doing, just like We Farm is doing in Africa, you have to go through clusters, because the value of a network is directly proportional to the number of people being part of that network. So if you go to Sorriso, where we have like maybe 1,500 different properties, at Paralogs there are like 320 something, which are the ones who has georeferencing. And if I have this 325, or if I have 150, is enough for me to know everything that's going on there, because of the data science, right? They're not that much diversification, even though even farmer thinks that his farmer is different from the other one. They're very similar sometimes, right? And there is a huge opportunity there, because if you think about it, Brazil has, I have in my system 525,000 titles of over 300 hectares. When we think about agro, we think about the big companies. We think about these big companies here, right? The huge ones. But they are like a teeny tiny part of the entire thing. The entire thing is, you know, there are 35,000 farmers between 500 hectares and 3,000 hectares in Brazil. And these are my guys. These are the ones that I want to help, because they have to get together in order to have more efficiency. Because they don't have, they have, for example, access to information that says that, you know, your farm is doing like maybe 65 sacks per hectare. So that's all they want to do, right? They want to do 65 sacks per hectare, 65. They're losing money doing 65 sacks per hectare. It's amazing. They might be doing like 58 and making money. They're making 65 and losing money. Not losing money, but losing efficiency, right? Because they don't need to have the same technology that the big farms need. They need another kind of technology. They need technology that is suitable for them. And that's pretty much what we are doing, FBN is doing. It's called Farmers First. For the first time, the farmers are more important than these traders here, A, B, C, D, and the 6 guys here who are the Monsantos and Bayers, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe there's a good chance for disintermediation and, you know, give more power to who really, at the end of the day, takes only the risk. Farmers are risk takers, and they take the risk. That's why when the year is good, the other year is good, the other year is good, everybody makes money. And then there is a bad years. Who breaks? The farmer. Monsanto doesn't break, Bunge doesn't break, but the farmers, they go broken. And that's something that can be changed, and that's the kind of companies that we are doing with innovation. There's another thing that I think is very interesting, talking about the titles. Companies like FBN and Paralogs and WeFarms, and there are other companies that they can do the same. There is a huge opportunity for blockchain in that area when you talk about the titles, because the blockchain technology allows, it's a ledger. It's going to take a while to explain the whole thing, but actually it's something that you could, by using blockchain, substitute the notary, substitute the city hall as the place to register your title. And that's going to happen. I'm sorry. Let's move fast, because that's going to happen. There is no way.
Excellent. You talked a little bit about breaking and default. I want to talk a little bit about leverage, starting with Antonio. Like 2 or 3 years ago when we had this panel, it was very hard to find banks getting excited about agribusiness. The trading companies were doing a lot of this, the financing. Antonio, tell us a little bit how, what's happening with leverage, who are the players, how are farmers dealing with I understand, is a high level of leverage, and where is that leverage trending to?
Yeah, a structural financial problem in the sector. In other words, farmers are extremely good in terms of managing their operations, in Brazil, I mean. They are highly competent, they are very creative, they have proven themselves in terms of the introduction of new ways of running the business, on the managing of their capital structure, and I'm talking on average, I'm not, pointing specific farmers, but on average, they tend to be much less efficient. And what happens is that when you have the boom periods, everybody makes a lot of money and goes buying more land and more very sophisticated machinery, without taking a hard look at the future cash flows that such decisions will entail. And then whenever there is a blip, whenever there is drought or a reduction in commodity prices, you see several farmers running into problems. In the past, their approach was, I'm pretty sure that if and when I run into these problems, I'll be able to roll over my debt because the financial markets tend to accommodate my situation. Over the past years, this situation has fundamentally changed. All of the financial providers have become much more strict in terms of providing credit and demanding payment. Several foreign players have started extending credit, and they are also extremely strict, and that has created a need for more capital and liquidity in the marketplace. And that's one of the reasons why we see opportunities to provide liquidity, to inject capital in high-quality farming businesses that for capital mismanagement in the past have run into trouble.
Excellent. So that's good news that foreign banks are getting involved. Obviously, lowering leverage is an important factor. And Enrique, I want to ask you a question. I understand that some of the Brazilian banks have a long list of farms that they've, quote unquote, inherited, and that they come and visit you, come and visit Antonio, come and visit other funds to see if you would be interested in some of these. Is that a genuine source of origination? Does that work? Have you ever done anything in that regard?
Yes, it is a source of originating business. Yes, but we prefer to partner with banks and farmers before they arrive in such a stressful situation. Of course, it can be done later on, but we prefer to partner because we are a source of long-term capital. So we provide a solution to them in both situations. One, if the farmer wants or the operator wants to grow their business. Typically, we have been done a lot of buying and leasing it back to the original seller. So in doing that, they can expand their business. And second, if the farmer wants to restructure their debt-to-equity ratio, we also, as a long-term provider of capital, we also can be a solution for them. And finally, and in addition to that, we are we bring good environmental and social governance to the regions we are present, and it helps both the country, the farmers, and the banks, which are receiving more and more pressure on following these ESG practices, right? When giving the loans.
Very good. Yeah. Paula, kind of a double question. One, give us your opinion. What are the top 3 logistics projects in Brazil that will help farmers become more efficient? And also, how do you attract more people into the logistics? I mean, private equity funds are going to want a certain type of return. Does that return exist? Does the government have to step in because these are projects that will take a long time before they generate return? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think probably, thinking a little bit about Rumo first, the most important thing for us now is that we finally have the renewal of our Paulista concession done once and for all. So that gives enough of security for us to continue investing, let alone the fact that we've been committed to the investments regardless so far. With that, we think Sorriso probably ranks next as a very interesting, because it's an extension of an existing railway. It gives a lot of scale. It's a very interesting one. It will reduce a lot the cost of gathering in the truck gathering of cargoes in the northern part of Mato Grosso state, and it also opens the floor for us to optimize other corridors by focusing in different cultures. The government is planning to auction the remaining kilometers of the Norte-Sul. I think this is going to be an important one. Paving BR-163, which is to help the connection up north. So there's many projects that the government can put focus on, and I think by improving the general sentiment around the regulatory framework and in the renewal of the contracts, this will happen naturally. In terms of attracting investors to those, I think there's different challenges, right? Because some projects are single cargo. Some projects have to deal with the seasonality of those single cargo situations. There's always a discussion about who's going to fund it, and then there's the role of who's going to fund the project of zillions of billions and kilometers of railway. If you need to have not only the regulatory security, but also traders or players willing to take-or-pay contracts, and so that you're really able to fund those projects in a sustainable way. I think talking about Brazil and assuming things will continue moving in the right direction, we'll certainly have additional investors willing to put money to work in infrastructure in the country. Is a logical investment. Brazil is, the biggest source of arable land, as we said before. Not only Brazil, but the world needs this to be working properly so that, things work in the future. As far as Rumo in particular, this being our vehicle of investments, what we see is when we look at the investor base of Rumo, it's probably the healthiest investor base in the sense that is the place in our group where we have more of long-term people willing to put money to work in Brazil. So this is from an equity investment standpoint, it seems to be a success story already.
Excellent. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to start opening up to questions from the audience. The question is for Antonio and Enrique, and it talks a little bit about the exit strategy of your funds. I understand that, again, there's a difference in exit, so maybe Antonio, why don't you start, and then I'll ask Enrique to complement it.
Yeah, we have a fund that we consider medium term. It's a 10-year fund. So obviously we need to think about our exit strategy whenever we are investing now. And basically we have a core exit strategy, and we have, if you will, some level of optionality. The core strategy is to sell the medium-sized farms that we are acquiring to neighbors. In other words, before acquiring a farm, we map out the ecosystem of that microregion to make sure that we have a number of medium-sized to large neighbors that in the future could potentially acquire the farm. And when I say in the future, I'm talking about 3 to 7 years. And we try hard to do that because we know that the neighbors, the well-capitalized neighbors, tend to be those that pay the highest premium for the property because they can exploit several synergies that other people cannot. So that's basically the core exit strategy. The option that we have is that we believe that in the future, the restriction to foreign investors will be altered. It may be not in a year or in two, but over the life of the fund, this restriction is very likely to be changed. And then we would have also the possibility of selling much larger packages of land to large international investors.
Excellent. Enrique.
Okay. Yes, I agree with this neighbor possibility that they pay a better price to dilute their fixed costs in operating the farms. But in terms of exit strategy, as we have much longer term funds, we have the ability to choose when to invest, where to invest, and when to leave. So we are not under pressure to have an exit strategy. But I would say the exit strategy starts when you, in day -1, when you are doing the analysis of each farm, when you are doing due diligence, and you are preparing the liquidity already of your farm, either through title chain, either through environmental legislation, if you are compliant or not, if the property is complying or not. But I think I would say what we are very, very keen on is quality. So agronomic aspects of the property, both rainfall, soil, crops that you choose to crop on, tenants that you choose to operate in your farm, all that brings liquidity to your exit. So day -1 is where our exit strategy starts.
Okay. So I'll open it up to questions. If you can raise your hand, somebody will bring a microphone. As a courtesy to the person you're going to ask the question, if you can introduce yourself and let me know if you have a specific questions for somebody in the panel. So somebody raising their hand. While you're deciding up to if you want to ask a question, I can't resist to ask Caio, bringing this disruptive app, are you feeling death threats from Big Ag?
No.
Okay.
I think the death threat is in another place.
Okay. Any questions? I have a bunch more questions here. Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
First a disclaimer. I come from a very, very small town in Brazil. I grew up in a small sítio, and I think it's fascinating that everything you talked about becoming more efficient and everything. But will the land, the soil, support all these activities?
For me?
I think it's open question.
You're looking
to
at
whom,
me, so.
Because you went to Piracicaba in the school of...
Exalc, yes, University of São Paulo, Exalc at Piracicaba, yes. Yes, I think you have all sorts of farmers, all sorts of operators. So if you are talking seriously about agriculture and seriously about the business, you must take care of the soil. You must, because what you produce, you extract from the soil. You have to put it again, either via inputs or preserving, like the no-till practice, and cover crops. Brazil developed this high-tech, which is not high-tech in his aspects, but in ag, conquering a tropical weather in sometimes poor soils in the Midwest, and found ways of producing the same kind of productivity that you have in Illinois with superb soil. The same, or even better than Argentina with superb soil. And that is technology. That is not like in our mobiles every day. It's not in our TVs and what we call technology, but it's a very high in-depth research and practice and sweating behind it. So yes, I think the soil can support all that, but you need science. And it's a very sustainable business, agriculture, because if you don't care, if you don't take care of your soil, you simply don't have a crop. It's simply like that.
If I may add, in our fund, we are landowners and we are not farmers. So in order to be able to sell the land in 5-7 years at much higher prices, we have to make sure that we are taking good care of this land so that in the medium run, it will show very high levels of productivity. So it's really key to us to work with the farmer to ensure that they are not simply optimizing the crop for 1 year, extracting as much as they can, and then leaving, an exhausted land, and make sure that the land is being permanently corrected so that, in the long run, it will continue to show high levels of productivity.
And just one thing also, when you have technology, now I'm talking about communications technology, go into a farm, it gets a lot more transparent at what is going on in that farm. So the community together with, people in the city, they will be able to follow and see what's going on there. And the regulation, I believe, it's pretty good, right? In Brazil, I believe, I'm not a specialist, but what I heard is that it's being, well implemented and is kind of good, right?
Next question. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rubens. I'm with Argus Information. The question that I have is not related to what I do, but it's more personal curiosity. Enrique, you mentioned about ESG, and I'm curious to know, what kind of initiatives you're all looking into, regarding the greenhouse gas emissions mitigation for, the agribusiness you're doing. What kind of initiatives you're focusing on and trying to support for, giving back to the investors and the producers.
Very good. Just for those who don't know, and I didn't know it a while ago, ESG is environmental, social, and governance.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, our returns would come from, yearly income from leases and long-term land appreciation. But all of that has to be coming with a responsible investment. So most of what we do is during diligence. First, not only the legal aspects, but the environmental aspects. And you identify if your legal reserves and permanent protection areas are there. If not, you have to make it. So we have to follow the forest code, which depending on the biome you have different percentages of the farms that you have to preserve. Let's say in general, around in average, 80% in the Amazon biome, 20% in the southeast, but in average 30% of the farmland should be set aside as preservation areas. So we do this kind of diligence, and we take care, we monitor every year if the reserves are being preserved and there is no invasion, nobody is taking trash and dumping into these areas. If all the water springs, water sources, rivers, lakes, and etc. are being preserved, you need a certain number of meters surrounding these lakes and water springs to be preserved, and you have to make sure they are in compliance with the legislation. In addition to that, we are doing a social due diligence. So we look at not only people might be living in these areas, but people nearby, traditional communities or communities in general around the farms, and evaluating the possible impacts this operation might having in those communities. So those are practice. And after purchasing a farm, we follow our tenants. We go there and we audit their practices in environmental and social aspects, labor, protection equipment, and besides the preservation areas. So those things are ways of bringing good governance to the regions that we are present. Okay.
Cosan has many programs similar to what Enrique is mentioning. I mean, not only the ethanol is by far the least carbon emission fuel, which is something good in itself, but also, we co-generate in our plants. We try and use, for example, the leftovers of our production into fertilizer. We are always looking at alternatives to use the sugarcane bagasse. So this is one area of making sure that our production extracts the most and ejects the least to the environment, same on water usage and so on. The other part of this sustainable approach is how we treat our producers, because Cosan buys 50% of its sugarcane from third parties. So we try to extend all of the programs that we have, from use of technology to joining our procurement efforts, so on and so forth, to our producers as well, so that we make sure that they are moving into a sustainable direction as well. And from an investor standpoint, which is the kind of the pushback that I get, I see more and more funds, especially in Europe, but now more in the US as well, having like ESG dedicated funds, green, like you have the initiatives like the green bonds. So not only this is very important, and we are very committed because we are committed to sustainability, but I think the entire world is, and this becomes a very important stamp for investors. And I think this is why this is a virtual cycle. Okay.
Just adding one interesting aspect. We are starting measuring the carbon footprint that she mentioned. I cannot open some numbers because it's going to be released soon. But it's very interesting that the amount of carbon emissions in the ag operations within the properties that we manage are offset by these preservation areas that we maintain in a ratio to 1 to almost 100. So being 100 the carbon that you capture in this set-aside land. So that's something that the world will value one day. Society is heading there, but
blockchain.
Excellent.
Blockchain.
Anyway, as usual, we ran out of time, Ted. I'm a little bit over the time, so I'm sure there's more questions in the audience. I have some more questions, but we have to respect the time. Thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you very much for the participation of everybody.